I was deeply shocked by a French thriller, God, that's a bit of a tongue twister for me, a French thriller that came out last year called Fleuve Noir. Now, I'm going to give a spoiler alert for the viewer who may not have seen this film. For me, this film turns on the catastrophic results which flow from a father's willingness to abuse his daughter, who is mentally challenged and displays an interest in sex. Now, for me, that was deeply shocking. I've never seen this before in the movies. So, Miro, Paul, are there some subjects that ought to remain taboos?
No, I don't think anything should remain taboo, especially something as common as the sexual abuse of people with learning difficulties. I think it's incredibly common. I used to work for a large institutionalising organisation, and it happened in virtually every institution that I had. And equally, it is so common, that form of either physical abuse of disabled people by carers, by parents, sexual abuses along with that as well, that I think it's probably one of the great hidden crimes against humanity in contemporary Western society. Well, probably all societies, but I don't particularly know about a lot of societies. I only know about the society I live in, and I think it is so common, as is sexual abuse against children, and it's usually within the family by parents, etc. All those kind of things. I wasn't shocked by it at all. I think we'd call it Black Lake or something. I think it's called here. I wasn't shocked by it at all. I actually thought it was a really good film, but I think it's in a way, my problem with it in relation to the sexual abuse of disabled people, that particular film, was it was more of a tool of it rather than an exploration of it. And I think it would be quite nice to see a film that actually explores it and tries to get beneath a lot of the causes of that, which are about power, or the dispossession of power of masculinity, the crisis in masculinity that makes men particularly seek to impose their power on other people who are they consider the weak and the vulnerable. But I think nothing should be taboo, and I think the thing I really did like about the film, which I think is linked to it, is the way, the power of the creative arts, because it's actually about someone who wants to be a novelist and plays with everybody involved in the drama to bring about truths. And I thought that was really good, because I think that is one of the great things about art. It does have that power to delve into and to explore and to cajole and force people to confront truths, either in themselves or in society. And that film does that, and I thought that was really good. It's a shame that, in a way, the sexual abuse of the person with learning difficulties was just more of a kind of a tool of that rather than an exploration of that, and it could have been a bit more evenly based, rather than it got caught up was, did he do it or didn't he do it? The author, the wannabe author in it. But I think nothing should be taboo, and I think you need to be able to delve deeper and clearer, and actually not worry about audiences. I think that's one of the problems in state broadcasters, for example. Often they chase audiences is when they shouldn't, because they're state broadcasters, they have that funding, and they should be exploring those issues where it needs to be done, and you haven't got to worry about audiences. And I think the problem for me is, for example, BBC films, for example, are often too engaged in wanting ratings, and that is a criminal case of negligence in my view.
Miro, Paul makes excellent points. I found this. I think this is a film for me that's got better the further away I am from it. I thought it was a really hard film to watch. Vincent Cassel is, in fact, apparently it was supposed to be a film for Gerard Depardieu, but he dropped out and Vincent Cassel took it over. He does an excellent job, I think. But the reason why I ask, I think Paul obviously is right. Art should be an environment where we can discuss anything. But it's the social ramifications of this particular issue that make me ask this question, because it's true. All of us know that the sexual abuse of people with learning difficulties is very widespread. It is prevalent, and too often it goes unpunished. Another thing that bothers me with this film, and I don't know, the thing that bothers me with this film is that there is the suggestion, the very strong suggestion, that the child, the minor,
enjoys it,
has sexual desire, and that the father uses this to satisfy his own cravings. This just made me deeply uncomfortable. It's very rare that I'm discomforted by something that I see on television or in the cinema, but this really, really bothered me. What did you make of that, Mira? What did you make of this movie?
Well, I don't actually see this movie. This is something I didn't actually see. But again, just going back on the point around is it acceptable to show these issues? I suppose the problem is that if we don't highlight these particular narratives or particular contexts, what you have then is a reinforcement of a normative approach to say these things should be dismissed, they shouldn't be explored, they shouldn't be highlighted, particularly when actually the prevalence of these issues are clear to see, and the consequences of that for the individuals and for groups of people who are being abused. So very much we need to use the art as a vehicle to try to explore these and throw them out for debate and discussion, as a way then to use it as a vehicle to say, actually, where in contemporary society are these issues occurring? Are they where they're being not necessarily having enough investigation, where there's not enough of a reaction by the public or in terms of policymakers to do something about this? So very much, I think you need these opportunities to show it. The issue around what you just said about this uncomfortableness associated with the film, I think that's part of the significance of such storytelling, because you need to understand and to reflect on why this makes you feel uncomfortable, and why, particularly within disability, that questioning around your position to the story and your position to the experiences that are being unfolded in the story, as a way to reflect on your own personal views and opinions and biases towards particular topics, such as the treatment of people with learning disabilities, or people who are incredibly powerless in the system because they don't have the right level of support, issues around sexuality and disability, and the ideas of otherness that comes from such storytelling. But it'd be interesting to hear from Paul whether this issue around this aspect of pleasure in what could be perceived as either sexual assault or rape, was that something that you saw as well in the film, or you highlighted?
I think what was most interesting, actually, is because I don't think it's as clear cut as you saw it. I don't think the ending implies that actually it wasn't the father abusing her, that actually it was the mother. That bit in the cell at the end. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's him or her or the son. To me, the whole point is the whole game of manipulation that they were all playing at. Because what it indicated is, and again through the Vincent Cassel character and the Roman Duras character, both actors I really love, is that the key is this is a fucked up society on every level. There's nothing good about anything that we are enduring as a society at the moment. We're all playing games, we're all manipulating, we're all exploiting, we're all trying to exert some form of power to make ourselves feel worth something. And that to me is what the film was about. The learning disability was and I quite like that was the kind of the essence of how that became the focus. And I think it often is more actually the reality of the case in families of disability, because actually notions of power, identity, liminality, kind of multiple identities that we all have in society are actually thrown into flux in a way that actually represents society's broader kind of chaos of what we are as human beings. That I think that's what it did. It brought in class, gender, sexuality, the way the mother, did she seduce the policeman or did he rape her? You don't know. But that's the point. You don't know. because of power relationships and our sense of who we are in that kind of power hierarchy that we're constantly trying to construct ourselves, that we are just lost, absolutely lost. And that's why I thought it was a truly, truly good film. Absolutely brilliant, in fact. And the more I think about that, it is about that kind of notions of power. Stephen Luke's book called Power, it's only a little short pamphlet from years and years ago, masterpiece about how power is what notions of power in relation to identity is defining us in a way that's more so than ever, but in a way that is so distorted, so fragmented, and so fucked up that we're doomed. And actually that film captured that perfectly. And I thought, because nobody comes out of that in any way good, not even the policeman. The policeman's confused. He's a completely distorted, unbearable character, the wannabe writer. Yeah. You know, I think what might be worth seeing is a film, for example, called The House that Jack Built, Lars von Trier's last film. Have you seen that one?
No.
Oh, now, that is disturbing. And I was watching it thinking, it's about a serial killer, and you're sitting there and you're thinking, I'm not sure they should be allowed to make this. But actually, you know, as I said before, you should be allowed to make whatever you want. But actually what it does is, it's Bruno Gantz's last film, actually, The Legend That Died Yesterday. And it's about the serial killer. And it's just him going around killing people, Matt Dillon going around killing people. But actually, it's about society, it's about now. And it's just not good.
I think that's just an excellent point. As you spoke, I was thinking, yeah, that's it. That's the reason why I was really uncomfortable watching this film. It's the lack of any kind of moral order at all. At all. There is nobody who, as you say, has any semblance of... There's nobody who's clean in this film. That, yeah. I think you've said it all.
The question, I mean, again, this is the beauty. I haven't seen it, so I can throw the question out. But do you think that there has to be some acknowledgement, though, that we are approaching this from, Paul and I, our backgrounds in sociology, Nigel, your interest in human rights. The question around, typically, though, what would the mass audience make of this type of film, and how then do we shift the discussion and the conversation, and also the framing of these issues towards more what you were touching on, Paul? Because the question, this would never get released, my view, probably, in the Odeons or in the showcase cinemas in the UK. It probably would never be shown on BBC. So how do we try to use it as a vehicle to shift those prominent key issues and make them part of the discussion for mass audiences to explore and to consider?
Can I just jump in there? I think Paul obviously has a lot more to say on this, but let me just come in there. One of the troubling aspects of this film is precisely this point of how it deals with the issue of child abuse. Now, child abuse is framed always as, we all have an understanding of how this subject is discussed. Usually it's the father creeping into the daughter's bedroom late at night, going into the covers, child crying as the father leaves, and this whole secrecy, and finally it's uncovered, and there's that's what we're used to. That's not there in this film. Would you agree, Paul? It's just not there.
I would agree, and I think it actually goes one step further than that. All forms of contemporary relationships are just their version of sexual abuse on every level. Every relationship in that film is a relationship of sexual abuse. The policeman with the young policewoman, with the wife, the author with his wife. Who's got a newborn child, and that's what I liked about it. It's saying, all forms of contemporary relationships are just versions of abuse
or sexual power. Maybe not abuse. I don't know if there's. I think the author, if I remember rightly, goes on a kind of a cruising episode. This married author goes cruising in a sort of a nearby forest. Is it also about sexual power? If it's not abuse, it's about sexual power, and who has sexual power?
I think it was trying to say that all relationships are sexual power, and that is fundamentally abuse. And so I would say, yeah, absolutely. But I think it in a way, it was much better than that as a film and what it was trying to explore and trying to put it out to the broader society. You know, because his boss is a policewoman, then he has power over another policewoman, and then the kind of the straight white guy comes in and it's all authoritarian and tries to take it over. And actually, it was that whole thing about power, actually, and you never see that film. So even like in the Green Book, it tried to sort of say, well, we have equal power, really. It's just rubbish. It just has no basis in truth. You know, there are hierarchies. You know, even in the people we know, the people we relate to, work with, everything about contemporary modern society, capitalism, work, you know, status is about one form or another of the abuse of power. And then once you throw in sexuality as well, you know, we're doomed. God, I sound like I feel really doom-ridden this week. But actually, you got to explore those things, and that's what these things are doing, to liberate us from, you know. And I think that's what's so good about it.
Was there any form of resistance in the film, in terms of, you know, like opening up those pockets to try to push back against these forms of power and abuse?
Well, to me, what was good about it is that people seemed to be using that power in a manipulative way. So it wasn't. So, for example, I think when the mother, the wife, seduces the policeman, for example, or is it rape, or is it both? And it's both. And that's the point. It's both. And I think you rarely see a film where relationships, where you actually watch one thing happen, but you're seeing multiple things happen at the same time. And that was quite a breathtaking piece of filmmaking. That very scene in what he's doing there, and actually that's where I think that opens that avenue that we're all complicit. We're all guilty of this, even as the viewer, you know, because we're feeling uncomfortable about it. We're being taken aback by it, but we're watching it, and all on those kind of so many levels. I think coming back to your point, Miro, about audience perception, you know, I have a big problem with an audience perception, because although I think that's what this filmmaker was making, and I think he delivers on that for me, and I think he delivered on it for you as well, Nigel, that doesn't mean a lot of other people are going to see it in a completely different way, and actually, you know, take a lot of pleasure from it in a way that will be completely unproductive on a level. But that means they still should make what they want to make. You know, this the house that Jack built. You know, when I'm watching it and I'm thinking, you know, there's a lot of people out there who might be thinking about becoming a serial killer and think, yeah, let's go for it. And I really mean that. I can see a serial killer, you know, on trial in 20 years' time saying, that film, that's where I started. And that is awful.
Well, this goes back to my...
It's a great film.
That goes back to my point, Paul, about whether there are some subjects that shouldn't be touched. And I think we now need to open up this conversation to discuss how sexuality and desire of people who've been disabled is represented in film and television. The point that Paul has referred to that made me deeply uncomfortable is the fact that there's this notion of pleasure. So I put it to both of you. Can you give me examples of where popular culture, television, cinema, books has represented the sexual desire of people with disabilities? Or is it something that we don't normally talk about? Is it just one of those subjects that just don't appear?
Well, I think the problem is that it's not framed in any way that seeks to address the conditions within society which causes the marginalisation of people to be viewed in such a way as not having power over their sexual representation, or being framed in a particular way of being seen as deviant or kinky or unusual. In that sense, I see attempts by, you know, there are documentary programs that explore the love lives of disabled people in such a way, and they almost use it in form of kind of freak show voyeurism. I have a major problem with the way that there's a misalignment between the exploration of sexuality for disabled people and seeing that as something which is being created by the way we understand disability, and the way that we should think about disability in a sense of how society's organisation causes this experience disability to occur. So I think there's a real misalignment there, and equally I think going further than that, there is a problem of how when I see disability sexuality being explored in film and TV, it's typically used as a metaphor to draw attention to the non-disabled actor in terms of how they're trying to be portrayed as a savior, as somebody who is trying to create abuse or trying to create exploitation, or be seen as some kind of some kind of charitable individual. So again, I think that going forward, I want to see much more kind of recognition of how disability is understood from a sociological point of view, and then use that as a driving focus for then understanding how sexuality comes to the forefront of our thinking in relation to disabled people's lives. But I think there's also a problem in terms of disabled people activism and disabled people social movements, because sexuality is never usually seen as a priority issue. There's much more issues around the kind of materiality of everyday life, access to a job, access to housing, and so on. And the problem is that actually the significance of sexual experiences and the need to build relationships, you usually get dismissed then by the established figures and established groups in the movement. And that's something that is something that has been highlighted by many young disabled activists who are coming through, talking to me and to other researchers who say the importance of our sexual identity gets lost because we have to dismiss or separate that from our experiences as a disabled person.
We met at a conference which was organised to discuss this very subject. Are disabled activists, particularly in this cultural environment, filmmakers, YouTube activists, YouTubers, whatever, are they creating their own cultural products which discuss sexuality and desire from the perspective of people with disabilities?
Asking me, Paul.
I'm asking you both of you.
You answer me, right?
So again, I suppose the problem is that you don't have enough disabled people being involved in the production of such narratives and having the opportunity to say, this is how I want to create a story, this is what the story should explore. So there's that particular issue. But the reinforcement of how contemporary mainstream society builds this particular image of disability and sexuality is really problematic, because it reinforces issues around toxic masculinity, of normativity as well, in terms of how there is a normal way of having a relationship, there is a normal way of experiencing of having sexual experiences, and disability is seen as a deviation from that. So again, I want to see more of an alignment between the kind of prominent issues being raised by activists and social movements, and groups such as the ones that where we first met when we had that study session on disability sexuality, and then having those opportunities to emerge into the arts, film, television, exhibitions, and so on, in order to try to push these narratives and these types of discourse in order to explore this issue and in some way crip and explore the experience of disability in the existing materials out there, which has created or perpetuated this problem of sexuality being seen as not available to disabled people, or being seen in a way that is rooted in abuse or exploitation, and that has led to issues around trying to create or trying to reinforce vulnerability and not allowing disabled people from different groups to explore this issue and explore what this means for them as individuals. So that's where I want to see a kind of a focus on. Otherwise you just leave it up to those who have these considerable positions of power, deciding who should be making the stories, how they should be written, who then, when they move on, they get people who are the same as them coming into those positions and writing in the same way and producing in the same way. So I'd want to see more of that. But it goes back to my other point before, which is, as a disabled people's community, we need to think a bit more about the significance of sexuality in understanding our experiences of being marginalised and oppressed by society and by the way society is organised.
Paul, before you respond to the point or the question that was asked previously, let me just tell you about some. Well, I can't think of many films that have discussed the issue, who have allowed people with disabilities to have a kind of sexual identity. In our first podcast, we talked about The Shape of Water, which featured a deaf and mute woman who was considered exotic and sexy by her boss, who was having fancies about her. Going back at least 2 or even 3 decades, I can think of the film Crash. I can't think of many others. Is this a subject that, given the scope and breadth of Hollywood production or cinema and television production, is this a subject that is featured often? And if so, how is sexual desire of people with disabilities, how is this treated?
I think it's actually very, very common, actually, disability and sexuality, and showing it. And I think often that's the problem, is the desire to show it. Even going back, say, into the 70s, you've got Coming Home, John Voight as the paralysed veteran has sex with Jane Fonda. But even a more recent film, for example, like Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, Joaquin Phoenix as the paralysed quadriplegic cartoonist John Callahan. And then you had that one with Helen Hunt called The Surrogate, or Sessions, whatever, where she comes and has sex with someone for money and she's a sex surrogate. But equally, you're obviously not watching True Movies. There's a channel called True Movies about true stories. It's quite a lot on there as well. You know, parents dealing with their learning disabled children, becoming sexually active and having children. You can tell I've wasted my life far too much on True Movies. So it's actually really...
I bow to your expertise in this area.
I think, coming back to Nero's point, and I think this is what is often the key to it, is that notion of, you know, we need to value disabled people because in reality they can be normal, like normal people. And sexuality and sex, not sexuality actually, sex is the tool in which they sort of just push it over that, look, they can have sex. So look, they are like us. So, you know, they can be normal. But actually, what is normal is the very thing that oppresses us. You know, and actually I think Colin Barnes, to me, one of his great achievements in looking at disability and culture was, you know, he listed all these stereotypes. And then his last one was, and to me it's the most damaging, is disabled person as normal. And I put it on a parallel with, like, in relation to, say, blackness or race, is that you'll often get the kind of stereotype as the black person as normal, which fundamentally means white, to all intents and purpose, except they have black skin. That is absolutely evil. There's no way you can actually have a valid identity within that. And that to me is a key problem. Which is why it's a shame to me that often these films have to show it. So, for example, Joaquin Phoenix, quadriplegic. So there's women sitting on his head all the time, you know, and just to show it, that you've got to show it. You know, you can't talk about it, you can't explore it, you can't relate to it, you've got to show it. And that to me is just a lack of creativity in exploring that. Because, and I think the other thing is that most people don't have satisfactory sexual relationships. You know, the way young women feel today, the rise in self-harm of, you know, your average young girl. Most universities are getting 1,000 or more cases of self-harm a year. You know, the whole notion of sexuality is now so distorted, so corrupt, almost like a corrupt file. You get when you open a file and it says, oh, it's corrupted, it's blurred, and you see little bits and whatever. That's sexuality today, and that's what I would like to see explored. And I think disabled people are a good way to explore that. A lot of people, disabled people and non-people, you know, want to have sex and can't because they're not. They live in a society where the whole notion of kind of relationships with other people is now so damaged that we're on a precipice, which is just really, really awful. And I think disabled people's sexuality would be, in a creative way, a good way of exploring that. But often it ends up just being about another notion of their kind of normalness is using this kind of notion of the actual act of sex. And that's a true tragedy. But bizarrely, it is really, really common. I think one of the most interesting things for me is there was a film a few years ago with Matt Fraser and Lisa Hammond, who are quite big on British television, made by the BBC. And it was a romance between, she's of short stature and he's got thalidomide. But it was quite interesting. If you look at all other BBC films, they actually had sex. And it's quite, you know, the BBC loves to show a bit of middle-class sex. But they didn't do that with these two because they were disabled. But they had a romance and they got into bed together and they slept together. But there wasn't really that sex. So even often for someone like the BBC, it was just too frightening. But often Hollywood is exploring it all the time, you know, particularly on true movies.
This is true. In fact, I just remember one of the films I really enjoy, Forrest Gump. There's a huge dimension of Forrest Gump which is about his friend, his sea captain who was injured in Vietnam, and how he reconstructs his life and partners, etc. So you're right. Maybe it's more common than I think. If I can just bring in Miro's point, I think I am sensitive to this notion that it's our sexual identity is part of being a person. You know, who we love and how we love is part of our individual identity. So I think it's important that this is given prominence. So let's widen again our conversation. How do we make this better? Is it just we have to have more characters who are disabled in movies talking about sex, being sexually active? Is it that changes our understanding? Is that all that's needed? And is that possible given excuse me, is that possible given where we are in cinema and television now? Or are there other things that need to be done? Miro, we'll start with you.
Well, I think there's a number of issues. One is that you want to see this becoming more of a prominent issue across the activist narratives and the campaign groups that are exploring disabled people's marginalisation. Linking back into Paul's point as well, I think you need to unpick the significance of ableism within society and how society has created this ideal image of a human being, which goes against and challenges the very essence of being different, of not conforming to expectations of those with considerable power, of being seen in a productive way in certain ways and living your life in a particular way. So there's a desperate need to challenge that. And the question is can the arts do that? Now the arts can do that, but it very much depends on who is the master, who has the tools, and how those tools are being used. And the question, you know, I think when you're talking, I was thinking of Audre Lorde's, you know, phrase, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Now the question is how do we get activists and those interested in the arts, of producing the arts, who have a connection to the way that we're framing this debate, because we have to remember that this is just one particular aspect of the debate that's to be had on disability and sexuality. And the question is how do we ensure that there are those opportunities to write material, to produce material in a particular way. I don't want to just see more disabled people being portrayed on television, because the storylines will be dreadful. The storylines will be reinforcing the same mainstream rubbish that has been going on for the last 10, 15, 20 years. The point is how do you get various different iterations of this complex issue being presented in different formats? Because the concern is that you'll have very privileged individuals who, for a plethora of reasons, occupy these positions of influence and these positions in order to produce. But they'll create this idea of essentialism insofar that this particular image or this particular portrayal is reflective of everybody's experience. And the key issue is how do you have various competing, challenging, different images and different perspectives on this topic to be shown to different audiences, to have the availability for people to see it in ones which will be utter rubbish, the ones which will be really thought-provoking and challenging, being made available to people in order to actually, to push the debate forward. The point is that we shouldn't be trying to look for a particular outcome. What we should be looking for is particular vehicles to drive forward the debate so it can continue.
Yeah, pluralism of representation rather than the narrowness that we already get. And you get that through liberalising and forcing the institutions that control the means of production of culture to be diverse. And I think, as Miro, that's a wonderful quote, the master's tool will never be used to dismantle this house. The key problem is that the organisations responsible for creating change are actually incapable of delivering on that. Because what they're going to do is deliver either status quo or reinforcement of the very things that validate themselves. So often, and I've always had a problem with, you need more disabled people creating stuff. Well, I think they always have, but they tend to be often white middle class disabled people creating stuff that reinforces white middle classness. And again, but that's why they're allowed in, because they're going to reinforce the very things that the institutions are about, so they're not going to challenge it. And that's a core problem. And actually it needs to be taken off of them and almost a free-for-all, because the money that's available through these institutions, and I remember I think I said this before, I went to something and I said, well, disabled people should be, just automatically 25% of the BBC budget should be disabled productions. And they said, well, the people don't have the skills, they won't be very good quality. I said, if you watch television, it's shit. Normal people make most of what normal people make, like most of what white people make, is shit. And we should be allowed to make our own crap in a way to get to that level, to explore issues and ideas. So, for example, you said, for example, that you'd watched the film before the guy who made the film that you liked. You watched the film, Miro, and then you went back to his old stuff, and you didn't like it. But actually, you need to make crap to learn how to do it properly, to learn how to explore ideas. And I think that's what people who are marginalised don't have that access. And often we're given our one chance. And we know that we're going to have to play along with a certain the rules of the game, and that's the tragedy of it. And really, we should be just being allowed to make, tons and tons of crap like they have, and that's the key.